say I slept with one of my relatives, because that just isn't done. The things that I was thinking of covering here too is, does everyone feel genetic sexual attraction when they meet? Is this something that's going to automatically come with a reunion? Well, we haven't found that to be true. Some people do, some don't. We have no statistics. We have no idea how many of you will or how many of you won't. We find that a lot of people do, to some degree, feel some type of very, very strong attraction, and not understanding if it's just a small little piece of bonding process or if it's more than that. How far can it go? It can go as far as somebody saying, wow, is he cute? I wish that we weren't related. Or it can go into a full-blown sexual relationship that can last up to 20 years. Can we prevent it? As we discussed earlier, talking about what this panel would be about, talking about answers and questions, I'm afraid I'm going to raise a lot more questions than I can ever give answers. I don't know how to prevent this. I have no prescription pad. There's been many people that have written to me and called me on the phone and said, how long does this last? As if I can say, well, let's see, if you took a pill at 9 o'clock, by 7 in the morning, you should pretty well be over this. Or 3 months, as the Dear Diana column said years ago in the AAC decree, that it's over in 3 months. And I thought, gee, either Diana had never experienced genetic sexual attraction, or I was tremendously oversexed. Because I was going into like the 8th and 10th year and still feeling these terrible feelings. I'll start by telling you a little bit about how my attraction started. When I first met my son, my search actually was only 3 months. It was a very quick search, which means I only attended 2 meetings. And there wasn't a word about any of this at any of the meetings. This wasn't even discussed. It wasn't even an issue as far as I knew with anybody there. So it was nothing I was in the least bit prepared for. But when I did meet him for the first time, we had made an arrangement for him to come to my house. And he rang the doorbell, and instantly he was there. And the first thing I did was stare at him and thought, oh my God, he turned into his father. This child did not look like me in any way, shape, or form that I could see. This was his father revisiting me 26 years later, and that was real scary. I had not expected that at all. I had a vision all my life that this boy would look like me. I don't know why, but it's almost as if you forget that there was another party involved when you had this child. They forgot you. Why shouldn't you forget them, right? So when I did study his features, and I mean I studied his features, was there an eyelash that might be like mine? Did he look, his teeth were like mine? That was about the only resemblances. But even when he walked across the room, I saw his father. His father had one of those hoppy walks, you know, he hop. Well, he did the same thing, and it was just really freaky to watch him. And our first evening together was spent way into the wee hours of the morning. My husband, we have a very small home, so he was very sweet and excusing himself around 8 o'clock, saying he was very tired because there was nowhere for him to go where we could be alone other than to go to bed. And so he said, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to bed. And we said, bye, you know. And we talked till about 2 o'clock in the morning, and just trying to find out everything about each other that we could find out. He was an artist. I was an artist. That was real exciting. He brought his paintings over and his orange juice because he had laryngitis. I don't know if that was over nervousness, and I guess maybe he didn't think I'd be motherly enough to have orange juice. I guess I was supposed to be this sex object, as you said, you know, so they don't have orange juice. So he brought a whole jug of orange juice and sat there all evening long telling me all about himself and how he was still single, and I really liked him. I was beginning to really like him. I knew I loved him the minute he walked through the door. I knew I always loved him, but I knew I was really beginning to like him. Then it came time for him to leave, and it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and the orange juice was gone, and it was time for him to go to the car, so I kind of walked him to the car, and we said what my friends term a Jewish goodbye, that you keep finding another reason to have another conversation so that the night will never end. And we just kept talking, and we stood outside by his car like two teenagers, afraid to let the night finish. And when he left, I had the most horrible feeling of aloneness and emptiness, as if that's it, he's not coming back. I've answered his questions, that's all, and he's never coming back. And I found that each time I saw him over the years, even if it got to be 8 years, 10 years, I never felt like it was going to be another time, like it was, well, see you next week or see ya. It was always, this is it. This is the end. So each goodbye was painful. It was very, very difficult. After the first meeting, he came back the second time to a family reunion at my house. And during the family reunion, he met my other children, which I regret at this point. I don't think it was a good idea to do it that way, because I think it was too overwhelming for him. But I just found myself growing more and more infatuated with him and more in love with him, and beginning to feel really uncomfortable with this, because it just didn't feel right. You know, like you say, you know your boundaries, and it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel like the type of love that I had for my other children. And one of the reasons I think for that is, I may be groping for answers here, but one of the reasons I feel was I was never called Mom. I was Barbara, or Barb, because Mom was reserved for that special person who was his mother. And that was how it was going to be. He called me Mom for only maybe a week, and then his adoptive parents, he had a conversation with them, and his father said, "What do you call her?" And he said, "Mom," and his mother broke down in tears and didn't stop. And that's a real mechanism for her, and it worked every time with him. And he stopped calling me Mom, which I regretted, because I feel that put me in a peer place instead of a parental place. I really needed to be reminded every time I saw him that I was his mother. I didn't need to be Barb, because every time he would come over, or I would make an arrangement, and I went to any lengths to get to see him. I would arrange parties that he could come to. I didn't even care if anybody else showed up. The party was really for him, so that, come on, I'm having a party, come on over. And I just looked for any reason to have him there. But every time he would walk in the room, I became a 16-year-old seductress. I mean, they could have played Night Train in the background, da-dun, 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 and I would have been marching to the beat, because he turned me on. And a lot of people say, well, that's probably just sensual. It wasn't sexual. I don't believe that. When you're hot, you're hot. When you're not, you're not. And I knew when I was. But it was very difficult for him, because he sensed these feelings, obviously, because I did nothing but talk about it. I tried to talk about it with groups. I tried to talk about it in the support groups, which at that time I wasn't leading. And I kind of threw it out there as if to see what everybody's reaction would be, and I got that, "Ugh, is she sick? That's really weird." And the one girl said, "I think you're really sick if you feel that about your son." She's, "But I just met my brother, and I'm dying to have a pillow fight with him in my underwear." So I thought, well, maybe I'm not so sick after all. And then another woman came up to me after a meeting and said, "I'm so glad you talked about this, because my husband just met his mother, and I know that they're experiencing these same feelings, and I would like him to talk to you." Then I knew that this was not something I had invented, and I can't tell you how relieved I was to know that. I had always felt so much guilt around my own sexuality anyway, because I got pregnant at 15 years old and had a child at 16 years old, so I always felt pretty sinful about that to begin with. So once I started talking about it more and more, it grew. It seemed as if people were lining up behind me to discuss it. The first time I ever heard it mentioned at a conference was in Kansas, the first conference I went to. And what was that, 12 years ago, I think. And a girl had talked about meeting her brother and how sexually attracted she was to her brother. And boy, if he wasn't my brother, I'd jump on the back of that motorcycle and we'd be off. And I was really happy to hear that she was being open about it. But it still wasn't being that talked about in the movement, where people were really going out and spreading it around to the groups. It was still too embarrassing to do that. I went on Oprah Winfrey's show in May of 1987, and boy, did I get the flack for that. Some people were quiet enough, probably didn't approve of it, but didn't say anything. And some people were sending letters to other groups behind my back, hoping that I wouldn't get them, but somehow they managed to get to me anyway. But to tell you the truth, I do feel that they had a right to their opinion, and I think those letters probably should have been published. If they had a very strong feeling against it, then I think those voices should have been heard too. But the part with being on the Oprah Winfrey Show was you're not really covered because they want to make it such a sleazy thing. And it makes you feel real sleazy. I mean, you don't discuss it with Oprah at all. You discuss it with a couple of her producers. Then you're thrown on the stage with her. And the first question she asked me was, have you consummated your relationship with your son? I'm surprised I didn't sink through the chair. I mean, if I had, I certainly wasn't going to tell Oprah and the rest of the world. But that question really threw me for a loop. I had not anticipated that. But I met a couple that was on the show that were brother and sisters. I don't know if any of you have seen this show. And they wanted to marry each other. They were full siblings. And they talked about how much in love they were and how they did not feel the cultural taboo. Because why would you have a cultural taboo if you never knew this person? And now you met them and you fell in love and you were a lot alike. You shared the same interests. You shared the same desires. But it was a very costly thing for this girl to go on the show. She lost her 2 children. And because her husband could use it and the courts used it against her. She did finally marry her brother because in the state that she came from, it was not against the law to marry your blood brother if you were not, the only one you could not marry is your adopted brother because on paper you are brother and sister. If you are not brother and sister on paper, go for it. So they are now married. If you saw them out of disguise, which they had them in disguise on Oprah show, which was really hilarious because it looks just like them anyway. But they looked exactly alike. They just looked like twins. And they lost a lot. They lost their birth family because the birth parents who married each other later did not want to know the boy at all after this. And he never got to meet them. They disowned the girl. I just talked to her last week to find out if I could use their story and for the book, and she said no because it's been very, very uncomfortable because they had so much trouble with the court case, but they are still married. They have regained custody of the children because her husband was a raving drug addict and drug pusher, so they got custody of the kids. And they said that they didn't want anybody in their little tiny town to know that they were really brother and sister. How they're going to keep that a secret, I have no idea. So I'm not going to be able to use their story. One of the things that they were so strong about was talking about how they could not get it through their head that they were brother and sister. Because my brother is the boy I played in the bathtub with when I was little. She says the one I played in the sandbox with. And I think that's an important part. And the reason that people wanted to keep this so silent and so sealed was so that people out there that make laws won't say we should keep records sealed. I think it's just the opposite. I think we ought to scream it out so people know that openness is really essential. Because if you get to know each other when you're little, this might not happen when you meet each other. You won't be strangers. You'll know each other through your growing up years. Let them play in the sandbox so they won't play in bed when they're adults. One of the things that I can recall when I hugged my son for the first time, which was our second meeting, it was the greatest feeling I had ever had. I never remember experiencing anything that wonderful before. And there's something about the way he smelled and just something so familiar. He just was mine. And I read a little article in the Sun-Times that I put down here. I wanted to share it with you. And it's called Mother's Odor Familiar. A breastfeeding infant recognizes his mother soon after birth by her odor, according to a Vanderbilt University study. Smell is one of the earliest of the 5 senses infants use to identify their mothers, and it is essential to the bonding process, said researcher Richard Porter. He plans to test whether a human fetus responds to odors before birth. Rats whose mothers ate garlic cloves while pregnant were drawn to garlic after they were born, the study said. In 1975, Porter's research with smelly T-shirts showed that parents can identify their children by their odors. He said families have common odors. So I don't know if that's what we're attracted to or not. I haven't got the foggiest idea. Another column that was written in one of the papers was about what are the different laws in the different states about relatives able to marry. And someone wrote in on a column about marrying in Illinois, and the answer to that was, according to the law in Illinois, the proof, if you wish to find out, appears in Chapter 40, Domestic Relations 212, prohibited marriage. A marriage between the ancestor and a descendant, or between a brother and sister, whether the relationship is by half or whole blood, or by adoption. As far as I can determine, the reason for the law is that adopted children are given all the rights and privileges of natural children, and therefore legally they are not distinguished from them. But in some states you can marry a blood relative if you're not on paper. So I wanted to also thank the people that have been really helpful to me trying to get through this. You asked about what is your therapy and all of this. My therapy is, I can't have sex with my son. He won't let me. So I talk about it. And I talk and talk and talk until nobody can. They say, here comes that woman with genetic sexual attraction. Let's go down the other hallway so we don't have to listen to it. But that's what got me through it. If I can't do it, I at least can talk about it. And I have been requested to write a book on this subject for at least 10 years. And I have not done it for several reasons. One, I'm not a writer, which I thought was a very good reason. Two was that was kind of a scary issue, because it seemed to me that when I talked about writing it, everybody wanted answers. And I don't have them. I'm full of questions. And who wants to read a book that's full of questions? So I would talk to professionals, hoping maybe I'll nab somebody that's either interested in the subject and wants to do the research. And all they wanted was research. They kept saying, this is a great research project. Why don't you do it as a research project? I don't want to do it as a research project. I'm not into that. So I don't know how to do that. But what I want to do now is write the book as an experiential part of my life and all the people that have shared their experiences with me, or some of them anyway, and be able to put that out to you so that you can use it in your groups. I know there's an audience here for it. I don't know what's out there past Oprah, but chances are somebody will pick up on this and say there should be some studies on this, and I hope they'll run with it. I'll help in any way I can. But as far as the book goes, I think it's going to be an important piece of what you can take back to your groups and tell them, because they've been calling me for years, what is there to read on this? And there's only one little chapter in Birth Bond, and that's all I can find. And they covered it very nicely, but they also said they tried to not get into it too deeply because they didn't feel too expert on the subject. Not that there is one. I've been noted to be the expert. I don't know if it's because I was the one that had the most sexual desire that I'm considered to be. But I get calls from Australia and England and Canada. She's the expert. And but then when they call me, they say, well, who's the real expert on there? I mean, where's the professionals that are the expert on this? And I say, I don't know. As far as I know, there aren't any. But my book will be called, no, wait a minute, I gotta get this right. He's my son, but I'm not his mother. I'll let you all figure out what that means. But anybody that wants to share any experiences on that with me, you know, what they've gone through, or you know, be part of the book, please see me, and I'd be glad to allow you to do that. I'd be privileged to have you do that. And how am I doing on time? That's it? Okay. Thank you.
And I was so glad I had talked to you, because I incorporate that now into my preparation notes, and find that if you talk about this before it happens, that it can avert a lot of situations. First of all, they don't think we're going crazy.
Right.
But I really appreciated my association with you in Milwaukee, because it's the first I've been exposed to it, and it has really helped a lot of people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have there been any cases where there is a genetic sexual attraction between same-sex, birth mother, birth daughter,
yes,
father's son, where there's no homosexual or lesbian attachment involved?
The question, did everyone hear it? Has there been any reported genetic sexual attraction between mother-daughter or father-son when there has been at least no known reported homosexual tendencies in either?
Yes. I can think of one particular incident where there was a man at a conference and we were talking about this very subject, and he stood up and said, I am not homosexual, but I was very attracted to my brother. And we didn't know what to do about that since we didn't want to perform any homosexual acts, so they shared a woman. I went home and explained to my husband what had happened, telling him about what the conference was like, and my husband said, what a generous guy. I've also heard recently of, or not too recently, but years ago, there was a woman that came up to me and said that she was felt very, not sexual, but sensual with her daughter. And she didn't feel it was sexual, and yet she did feel it was sexual. So what they did was they stripped down and they slept together holding each other. And she said it was wonderful. And and they didn't feel dirty, and they didn't feel that it was something taboo. It felt right. And then she suggested to me that I tell that to my son, and we do the same thing. I thought it was a great idea, but he thought, if I told him that, I'm sure he would have run and probably still been running. I still would have been seeing the back of his neck.
I can't remember where I read this or heard it, but does some of that come from the disruption of not having that baby as an infant there again? I mean, it's like that feeling of not having had that feeling. It's an empty arms kind of thing. It's like an amputee, and so there's that feeling of wanting that physical closeness because you do that with that person as a child.
The question had to do with the school of thought that particularly birth mothers who had their infants taken from them immediately after birth, or never in fact were allowed to touch them, or perhaps only touch them briefly, that some of what happens when they meet as adults is a tremendously strong desire to be next to one another, to be flesh on flesh, which for those of us who have not had to relinquish our children can remember, I think, very well lying close to our infants and feeling something that was very special and one might say sensual, but when does that change? When adults then feel it as something that's more sexual rather than sensual. And I think that's something that has been discussed, at least on the East Coast, a great deal. Did someone want to say?
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. When you first have a child, for all of you that have brought a newborn baby home, or even in the hospital, you know the first thing you want to do is completely strip it of its blankets, its diaper, its socks, whatever it's got on, booties, and just take a good look. This is mine. It's got Uncle Harry's belly button and Aunt Nellie's nose, and not only are we claiming the parts, but we really want to feel that child in close contact. This is why breastfeeding is so special. And the same feeling when you see this person who's now, maybe 5'10" and 26 years old, you would still have that same feeling. I would like to see him, all of him. I never got to do that in the hospital. I wasn't allowed to do that. I was allowed to see him bundled up in a blanket in the nurse's arms. He'd never been in my arms. I'd never touched him at all. And my son and I are both very non-touching, non-hugging people. I've learned since I'm in this movement to hug people, but it's not something that ever came real easy to me and him, and we discussed that on our first meeting. And it took until our second meeting before we actually literally touched each other. And I hungered for touching him every time, if I was allowed to possibly be able to hold his hand or rub his back or be able to put my arm around him. But it got to the point where he would run out the door when he came to my house, or if I went to his apartment, I would feel so empty when I would leave him because I'd say, well, I have to go now. And I knew that he was backing away from me. He didn't want any kind of contact. I got to the point I said, I don't give a damn if you like this or not. I'm going to shake your hand. And I shook his hand. At least I got to touch him. So it did help. But yes, it's important to be able to touch.
And I wanted to just say one thing from the adoptee's point of view, and that is Kathy Sloan, who is a psychotherapist in Massachusetts, an adoptee. She speaks very graphically about feelings that she had towards her birth mother when she first met her. And what she talks about is feeling like she wanted to climb back inside. And I think that there are many variations on this. And I don't think they're very surprising, really, when you think about it and you think about what we mentioned in terms of sight and smell, particularly. But I also think that we have to remember that it's also potentially tremendously powerful and tremendously destructive in a family where there are other members. And what I mean by that is that it can hurt a lot other members in the family when three is a crowd and the beloved enters. And I think that's something we have to think about too. Yeah.
I wanted to ask a question. My name is Virginia Keeler-Wolf, and I'm a psychotherapist in the Bay Area. And I've just run across a couple of cases in the last several months in which birth mothers in open adoptions have come to me suspecting that there's some sexual abuse going on with the adoptee, and being in the quandary about whether or not, how to deal with that when they are at risk of closing the adoption or closing the limited access they already have to their child. Any ideas about managing this?
I just have to repeat this for the tape, and that is that the concern, I'm good, yeah, sure, I'll answer it too. The concern is that open adoption is become more prevalent, that some of the questions that are coming up now is that the birth mothers who have contact with the family and with the children, you're saying that you have heard that there's some indication that there may be a suspicion of abuse within the adoptive family, and the birth mother then runs the risk perhaps of closing the adoption if she begins to question. Is that
Right.
fair?
Right.
Mary Ellen is going to
I don't know what I'm
answer
gonna say,
that,
but I'll
and then
stand up.
Deborah will answer it.
What a dilemma. So much for my theory about closed adoption breeding sexual abuse. A couple thoughts. One is that I would assume that this is a situation where the birth mother has pretty active or ongoing contact, or not necessarily?
Yes. Ongoing contact and is sort of witnessing things that are making her feel uncomfortable, and how to get this issue raised without shutting the door on her access.
Right. A few thoughts. One is that I think that that children will tell us things if we create an environment of openness that allows them to tell. Again, it's a very fine line between, asking a child directly if you're really not sure and you're in that very precarious situation. But in my experience, if we create an open environment where a child can tell or can disclose, they might be willing to do that or able to do that. If it's so clear, or it's relatively clear to this birth mother, then she may need to, or they may need to file a report and risk the closing of the adoption. But if it's, I think that if there's enough evidence to suggest that this really is going on, then that needs to happen. The other thing is that if there's behaviors that are just worrisome, if there's any kind of open communication, to raise those issues anyway. I noticed that when Jane comes over, she's teary a lot, or that kind of thing. To raise it more in the abstract, in the specific examples, as opposed to, I think that she's being sexually abused in your home. I don't know if Deborah has other comments.
I know you, so I'm going to discount that part of it. But I think that in the situations where I've worked with both birth parents in open adoptions, it's so new, and the areas are so that you're kind of in that family and not in that family. And you can be getting, as Mary Ellen said, bits and pieces, but not the whole picture. So I think one thing that would be real helpful for birth parents is to get some consultation with a professional who knows about abuse and knows about family dynamics, and begin to look at and talk about, so that it isn't one person having to make that kind of decision or thought, but to really be able to work through and process, because families are idiosyncratic, and some of that, if you're only there part-time, may appear to be abusive. On the other hand, validate your own instincts. What you know inside, whether you read 4,000 books or no books at all, trust your gut, know what's going on, and birth parents have some responsibility. It's not okay to say, well, they're the parents, you're involved here, this is your child. And again, as Mary Ellen said, I think that's a risk that you may need to take for a time limited, certainly, to protect children. That's what adoption's supposed to be about.
Yeah.
This question is for Mary Ellen or any of the other panelists, but I've written it down so I can stay organized. Can you address, or do you have any experience dealing with adolescent adoptive siblings who are non-biologically related, using physical aggression as a way of expressing ways to avoid the absence of the incest taboo, or alternately to express sexual expression in a more societally acceptable way? And if so, can you share your impressions?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, would you repeat that?
Yeah, right.
Basically, that's based on my experience working with adoptive families who have multiple children who are non-biologically related. And there's probably a lot of other reasons for it, but I have found opposite-sex siblings really using aggression a lot, and it's been my impression that that's been a way they keep themselves from acting out sexually, because there is essentially no incest taboo. But I'd like other people's impressions as well.
So the question is whether aggression is a displacement activity or a distancing activity to try and ward off some of the attraction between non-related kids.
I'd like to give a real short one on this. It has not to do with children as much as it's one. As you said that, it gave me a good picture of my son and my relationship now. We battle it out a lot, and that might be one of the reasons to keep us distanced. That we do more fighting probably and battling than anything else.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I haven't really seen it that much, but it certainly makes sense to me to hear you talk about it. And the thoughts I have is, one is certainly trying to surface what's going on and to try to develop healthy ways that this aggression can get channeled, and also the sexual feelings can get at least talked about or discussed more openly. But I haven't run across that, but it's a really good point. Yeah.
Just not so much aggression, but the issues that occur. Two of our kids are very close in age, both gorgeous, handsome, but of course. And when they go out together, they don't look related, and so they get all these questions about, is that your girlfriend, is that your boyfriend, boy, that's a cute date you have, all kinds of those kinds of push almost towards that. And they have the kind of brother sister, yuck, that's disgusting. But I think in some ways, because they're not recognized as siblings by society, they have to defend even more against what are natural. I mean, they're both sexual human beings. So I think that because society doesn't in a way recognize their relationship as brother-sister, they are that's not reinforced. The incest taboo would not then be reinforced.
I have one more sentence, which is that there's a chapter in Suzanne Arms's latest book about, it's called Anne's Story, and it's about her being sexually abused by, I think, 3 of her non-related adopted older siblings, and I think I remember that there was violence in there too. And it's the only thing that I've really seen written concretely about a survivor's story about that. Does anybody know the name of it?
Handful of Hope.
Handful of Hope, yep. A Handful of Hope.
Adoption.
Suzanne Arms.
Suzanne Arms. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Chris Bravasco, and I work both in the adoption and fertility world. And I'd like to bring some attention to other potential candidates for genetic attraction, and that be children that are conceived through donor conceptions. It's estimated that there's approximately 80,000 children in the United States born through donor sperm, and they live in the same areas of the country, and so there's a great number. There happens to be a very vague psychiatrist in my area of Kansas City that did an article for an England paper about his studhood and his ability to give up sperm and claims that he has 500 children in the Kansas City area. That petrifies me. I have spoken as much as I can as a lone person in the fertility world about genetic contraction, and they of course think I'm crazy, so any support the adoption world can give, I would appreciate it.
That's a really good point.
What can we do?
Well, I think it's time that the adoption world starts recognizing donor conceptions as part of what we know and understand, to make policies and determinations that these children are part of our world. They're emotional adoptions, and there needs to be restrictions on programs and policies about sperm donors. There needs to be education. There needs to be information on registries. Children need to have access to records as adoptees need access to records.
Definitely.
Being very involved in open adoption. I almost hesitate to bring this up because this whole conference has had such a negative feel around openness, but I think what's happening is we're starting to address the problems that are coming out of a new form that I think is better than secrecy, but nobody said it was going to solve all the problems. And one of the problems I've seen is sexual, and that has been birth mothers getting crushes and becoming genetically sexually attracted to adoptive fathers. And we've had to start talking in our groups, and I think it's a very similar issue in terms of bonding as families, coming into a family and not quite knowing how you fit, as Deborah said, and seeing this kind of nice guy who's a good father, a good husband, maybe the best male role model you've had in your life growing up, who you begin to fall in love with and have some desires that the adoptive mother can drop in and you can have the man and your child together. Some have actually articulated that to me. I think we need to be talking about these issues in preparing people in open adoptions in terms of birth families and adoptive families in the same way that we are in terms of search and reunion. So I wanted to just comment on that. And the other question, I have a question for the panel. If we're talking about genetic sexual attraction as perhaps being a response to unfinished bonding, or a way of, in fact, bonding as adults to people that you were cut off from, the other thing that crossed my mind is that as an adoptee, since you're in a world where you're often isolated from people who look like you, smell like you, etc., could part of it be a way of taking in or wanting to take? Part could be you're wanting to return to the womb, so to speak, but could part of it be kind of a narcissistic desire to take somebody else into you so that you can feel more complete? And maybe that could be a reason for drawing together.
You want to repeat that, or you want me to
I don't want
go
her to
for
repeat it. Well, before you go for it, the other thing, that, Sharon, that I wanted to note was that we've seen adoptive fathers become very attracted to birth mothers because they're still angry that the adoptive mother has been unable to produce a child. And I think it's a two-way street. I think, once again, it's an unresolved issue on both sides. And we have to be alert about it. We have to talk about it. And I guess I'm a little bit confused as to why you say this conference is not open. I think we're trying our best. What was the feeling?
We've been talking a lot about the problems with open adoption.
Oh, yeah.
And I would just hate for people to go away saying, maybe we ought not to be doing this. What I think is happening is that we're looking at a response to closed adoptions by looking at open adoption, and now we've been doing it long enough where those problems are starting to surface. And I think we need to recognize that anything we do when we start moving families around are going to have problems.
Right.
At least we have a better crack at dealing with them because they're open and not secret. But I would hate for people to go away and say, gee, I went to a conference and they talked so much about what was going wrong with open adoptions, maybe we shouldn't be doing it. That was my fear.
Okay. I hope that's not the case.
Me too.
I was going to say pretty much what Susan said about the adopted father being attracted to the birth mother. Sometimes it's, wow, I've got a wife and the mother of my child, and this mother of my child is a piece of my child, and that's a pretty serious thing, a pretty drawing thing. As far as the narcissism, yes, I think narcissism is a very strong part of being attracted to this other person. Somebody came up here earlier and I was describing what happened to me one time when I was at a Truth Seeker meeting. I was conducting the meeting and I knew my son was going to attend that meeting, and I watched for him, and he was late as always. And I looked up at the doorway and he was standing in the doorway, and I looked over there and I didn't say, "Oh, there's Keith." I said, "Oh, that's me standing there." I had the strongest feeling of myself being a male and standing in that doorway. And I had told that to Tom Bouchard one time, who said that's how twins feel. And that's how twins feel. But I'm not his twin, but he is really the very much a male part of me.
Now it's 4 o'clock, so why don't we take the 3 people who were standing there and then break into groups after that, okay?
You got 15 minutes, and the room is going to be used by somebody else, right?
Oh, that's right.
They got to come back in 15 minutes.
Okay. So we'll take these 3 questions, and then somehow we're all supposed to disappear for 15 minutes. And let me make it clear again that there'll be 3 separate groups.
For
And-
adoptees, adopted parents and birth parents, right?
Not really.
We think in rethinking it that those individuals who have experienced or have been troubled by issues with genetic sexual attraction, whatever part of the triad you're from, that you will meet with Barbara.
And the others are what?
What's the problem?
And then mine's adoptees only, or
Yeah, let's do that.
is that right?
That's what, well, we want to do what's fair. Adoptees in Mary Ellen's group, okay? And in Deborah's group, adoptive parents.
See, if I took birth mothers only, there's some adoptees here who have really had the problem.
I thought we were going to talk about the issue in the safe group of being only adoptees and only birth mothers and only adoptees.
What does everybody prefer? Maybe we should ask that. Take a vote.
Do people want the groups to be separated based on triad membership alone, or on what the issue is? Okay, how many want it to be the issue?
What's the issue?
What's the issue? As I recall, you were talking about...
Maybe everybody who's interested in genetic sexual attraction should go with Barbara, and then Mary Ellen and Deborah divide the people between the adoptive parents and the adoptees.
And then what about birth mothers who don't fit into that
How about
category?
getting another leader? Yes. How about a birth mother leader?
Could do that.
A birth mother leader.
Who just wants to deal with birth mothers who aren't oversexed. All the unoversexed birth mothers who don't have this problem that want to just talk about birth mother issues.
We have a birth mother leader? Good.
Right.
Thank you. And please, those of you who are clinicians, please go to the clinicians. Ask the experts, okay? We really want these to be support groups. Okay?
This concludes this session.